This episode of IsraelCast was recorded before the barbaric Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7th, 2023. Wherever you're listening in the world, it's a pleasure to welcome you to IsraelCast, the podcast powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. I'm Steven Shalowitz, first reminding you that for over 120 years, Jewish National Fund USA has been the premier philanthropic movement for the land and people of Israel. Now, while best known for planting trees in Israel, JNF USA contributes to Israeli life in so many ways, including community development in the Negev and the Galilee, preservation of heritage sites, supporting people with disabilities, and connecting high school and college students to Israel. To learn more and to see how you can contribute, do visit jnf.org. Once again, our website, jnf.org. Hope you got it. And in just a short while, I'll be sharing with you info and dates for the upcoming Jewish National Fund USA Conference 2023. So get your calendars out for that. You won't want to miss it. But first, we're talking about the Philos Project on this episode of the show. It's an organization that seeks to promote positive Christian engagement in the Near East by creating leaders, building community, and taking action in the spirit of the Hebraic tradition. Luke Moon is the Philos Project's deputy director, and he joins us now via Zoom from just across town, right here in New York City, to take a deep dive into what they do. Welcome to the program, Luke.
Thank you for having me, Steven.
Let's talk about the Philos Project. It's absolutely fascinating what you do. Really just share with our listeners what it's all about and how the project came into being.
Yeah, we were started in 2014. It was a time when the rise of ISIS was happening. The Middle East was really a turmoil. And we saw an opportunity to really have a different kind of conversation about Israel and the Near East. At the time, we call it, we were focused on the Middle East as a whole, but we tightened that aperture a bit more focused. But, really with the rise of ISIS, we saw that so much of the rhetoric around Israel, the Jewish people, Palestinian conflict, there was issues of Christian persecution, that we really needed to have a different kind of conversation. And so, some of the other organizations that were out there, they tended to, be they often were bombastic sometimes about how they talked about, the rest of the nations around Israel, right? Like, well, let's just turn Iran into glass, or something, that kind of very heated rhetoric. And we thought, if we're going to get the next generation of Christian leaders to take this issue seriously, we need to change how we talk about it. And so we did. We started, early on the Philos Project. We had a blog. That was back in the day when blogs were a thing. And we would have 3 articles a day. 2 would be about Christian persecution or something happening in the region, and 1 would be about Israel. And the idea was to put the conversation about Israel into the conversation about the Middle East as a whole, because the way it was often treated as, Israel is in the gated community of Western Europe, when in reality it's in the tough neighborhood of the Middle East. And so by putting that kind of framing in place, it helped us have a more rounded conversation about Israel. And then also the fact that we were genuinely concerned about the plight of Christians, because we would go to Jordan, we would go to Iraq, we would see what was going on the ground, and then basically remind people back home, listen, this is serious. We need to take it seriously.
How fascinating. And so talk to us about then the organization itself. When you say we, share with us who the we are.
Yeah, well, originally there were 4 of us. I'm number 2, the executive director, big boss. His name is Robert Nicholson, and he was, we were kind of we met actually at a conference in Bethlehem. We were both critically observing a conference. We were told to look out for each other. We met in the hallway, and we just hit it off. We had the same kind of impulse to try and engage the next generation on the issue, but B, also we're somewhat unafraid about kind of going to the hard places first, right? If people wanted to avoid conversations about the settlements, we'd actually start the conversations about the settlements, right? We would find that we would most people, when you offer to take them for a beer, they'll take you up on it. And so, we would go and invite, some, anti-Israeli person to come have a beer, and the conversations were often quite illuminating.
Is that
And
here in the United States, you mean?
no, this is in Israel,
Okay.
in the West Bank, and we developed a lot of really kind of deep relationships, a lot of deep connections, and therefore we had our ear to the ground on what was really, really happening beyond just what we would see in the headlines. Things that people would tell you when they're alone is different than we're at the front of the stage in a group of people. And being able to kind of have those conversations was really important to us. And at the time, we also had a man working for us named Jesse Rojo. He ended up starting our Hispanic Affairs program, now called Philos Latino. And, really a big part of the way that we talked about this was, imagine 100 million Christians in America, 20 million love Israel regardless, 20 million hate Israel regardless. And this group in the middle, unengaged or underengaged on Israel. And the makeup of that group is the younger you were, the less white you are, and the more you run stuff within the Christian space, the less likely you are to support Israel. And that's true now, and it was true then. And so we really just started to do programming to engage those different groups distinctively. So we started a program called Passages, which brings Christian college students to Israel. It's like a Christian birthright type program. They've taken over 10,000 Christian college students to Israel, and we ended up spinning them off because they just grew so big that it was healthier that way. We started like I said, a Hispanic Affairs program to engage the Hispanic community. We started an African American Affairs program to engage the African American community. Since then, we've also started. We have a Catholic program, other programming. So it's pretty broad range.
Yeah, I want to take a deep dive into each one of those programs that you have. But at its core, why do you see it so important to engage with Israel and bring Israel into that larger conversation that you were talking about as it relates to Christians in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, I think that a lot of Christians, there's a sense of a connection, a historic connection to Israel, just because we read our Bible and it's all about the Middle East, the Near East, right? And so but I think a lot of people are confused about the influence that the Hebrew Bible had on Western civilization. So much of the political thought out there, I mean, just take your average classical education school or homeschool program. You learn Latin and you learn Greek, right? Which is great for learning about the Romans and the Greeks, but it's actually the Hebrew Bible that probably had a more profound impact on Western civilization than either of those other civilizations. And it was very common in the period of the founding of the United States, when nations around the world were wrestling with the idea of monarchy and kings and that kind of thing. All of that conversation was taking place on the backdrop of just having had the Protestant Reformation. Protestant Reformation came about because the Bible was suddenly in the hands of the average person, and they started reading the Hebrew Bible, started seeing how Israel was created as a nation, and from that our Western tradition was developed. And so for us, I have a friend who uses the term. His name is Oz Guinness. Uses the term cut flower generation, meaning that we're living in a moment where we're like cut flowers in a vase. We're rootless, right? Like we don't understand where we came from. And so, yeah, the flower looks nice in the moment, but it's withering because it doesn't have any roots. It's not connected or grounded. And so the idea of connecting the Christians in America with what was going on in the Near East was largely an attempt to reroute uh, the average Christian American, particularly the average young Christian America, to their faith, and by default, connecting them to the basis of their faith.
So let's go into some of the programs. You just referenced the one where you take college students to Israel. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that. Who are these kids? What do they study? What does their trip look like? And then what do they come back thinking or feeling? Have their thoughts changed about the region? Can you address that?
Yeah. So, we started that program right around 2016, and
And share the name of it again.
it's called Passages.
Passages, right?
Yeah. And Passages, yeah, it was like I said, it was like a Christian birthright. You're a Christian college student. You can apply to go on this trip. Typically, it was cohorts from individual schools.
Mm-hmm.
And typically a bus load, so like 40 people.
Are they from all over the country?
From all over the country, Christian schools, non-Christian schools, state schools. We tried to focus sometimes on some of the schools where there was kind of like BDS type issues on those schools and campuses. But it was one of the things that we saw early on in just the whole trip world in general was the lack of follow-up. What we saw is a lack of follow-up. And I remember sitting with Robert, and we were talking about our own trips that we were organizing for, we call them VIP leaders. And we found that, you gotta like do some pre-trip programming, which means that you get people up to speed before the trip. And then after the trip, you need to do stuff. And it's very intentional. It's not just when you get back home, support Israel, right? It's like, what are you going to actually do? And so the Passages trip, they have the participants apply to be a part of it. Of course, they have to have letters of reference showing that, because it was targeted towards not just anybody, because there's lots of us, but leaders specifically. So they had to have references from faculty. There was a whole host of pre-trip programming. So there's Israel-Palestinian conflict 101, kind of the biblical roots of our, where it's, Israel as as the home of our faith. And then afterwards, they also are required to do some programming afterwards. And one of the interesting things was, like, each participant puts money forward, and if they do what's expected of them on the back end, they get some of that money back. And so we created this financial incentive in order to get the students to actually follow through on their commitments. And it could be everything from hosting something at your school, writing a letter to the editor, some very practical things like that. But
what a great idea, because it really gives them a sense of incentive, as you said,
exactly,
to really get involved afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah. And we found that it was like the response rate of people actually doing stuff with the financial incentive was in the range of like 80%, which was great. I mean, it means there's 20%. There's always, I guess, 20% fools out there who just throw away their money. But it was, these guys were like, they follow through on it, and as a result, you have this a very strong understanding that, like, whether your program's a success. So it does ancient and modern Israel. We're very intentional about the kinds of trips that we do, that it's not just a series of random experiences, but each day is basically a part of the story. Right?
And how long are these trips?
Typically 9 days.
Are they sort of during spring break or summer? When do they happen?
Winter break, spring break, summer break. The high seasons for, obviously, any of the student trips.
How many students go a year, Luke?
About 3,000 a year, actually, at this point.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot, and it's been really successful. Really successful.
And are they coming back with a different sense of what Israel's all about? Can you talk about their perceptions before and after?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's I mean, I won't say it's night and day, but it actually is very common, having taken a lot of people to Israel over the years. Israel for the Christian, it really does get under your skin. I mean, because for the Christian who reads their Bible, uh, they've read about these places. They've read about Jerusalem and the Galilee and the Sea of Galilee and Capernaum and all these places, and to suddenly be standing in those places, and your Bible then suddenly comes alive. It leaps off the pages in that were in black and white and print, and become like physically grounded somewhere. And that really has, just in and of itself, that alone has a transformational effect on the average Christian. And to that, but it's not just enough to say, let's go see, ancient Israel or the Israel of the Bible, because you have to connect people with people. And one of the things that we were very clear about at the beginning also was, like, basically the goal was like 2/3 people, 1/3 sites, right? So let's emphasize connecting people to people, and kind of de-emphasize the sites. Now it's not a proper ratio, but that kind of like orients the goal, right? Because it's hard for 3,000 students to do this, but we do this with some of our other programming. Getting in the home of somebody every day for a meal is kind of a goal, right? Like, because what does that do? When something happens in Israel, that's when the text messages arrive saying, "Hey, I saw that you're in the news. You guys safe?" That kind of human to human connection is what turns a typical trip experience of seeing the sights and the stones and Jesus walked here and this happened here, to that was an amazing connection. And now, like, oh, like Israel is real and it's present, and these are real people today, just like me, and that kind of thing. And it has a really a transformational effect on people.
And so, if anyone in earshot is interested in sending one of his or her kids or someone that they know on this program, where do they go, Luke?
Passagesisrael.com is where they go for that. So take them there and they can apply. And it's subsidized as well. So there's some, it's not free, but it's heavily discounted.
Right. What a great program.
It is really amazing.
I want you to talk now about the Philos Action League. It's a membership organization of Christians who commit to attend protests and other events with Jews to oppose anti-Semitism, or as I've come to call it, Jew hatred.
Right. No, and that was the Philos Action League was really started as, in part way, in frustration of watching anti-Semitism take place, and everybody's responses was, I'll change my social media post, or it's like it lacked a physicalness to it. And for me, it was a moment. So we had done at the Philos Project, almost from the beginning, we've been doing stuff on anti-Semitism. We had a program called We Resolve, which was trying to get Christians to sign up to commit themselves to educating themselves about the history of Christian anti-Semitism. And we did, we would, a couple of times we did some rallies where we gathered Christians and went and stood in like Jewish communities just as a show of support and solidarity. But for me, it really started when I got asked to go and cover an anti-Israel conference, or not conference, but rally in Teaneck, New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And this was in 2021. And I, rather than go as like a journalist, I went more of kind of like an activist. And I went by CVS and I got a sign, or poster board, and a sign I wrote, "I stand with Israel and Jews." And I remember coming, to the place where the event was being held, and there was a fence that was basically dividing the Palestinian activists on one side, and on the side that the non-Palestinian activists was going to be was empty. It was a giant field, but it was empty, and it was me, literally standing there by myself. 250 on one side and me on the other. And I was like, man, it would be really great if we could get more people to join me because it's lonely out here. And and so that was kind of like where the kind of the seeds began to get planted. And we have this concept coined by our executive director Robert Nicholson. He calls it incarnational advocacy, meaning it's like in the flesh, right? It's really physical.
Mhm.
And so the idea is that of the Philos Action League is actually showing up. And it's when there's an incident of anti-Semitism anywhere in the country, a Christian will show up at that location with a bouquet of white roses and a card saying, "We stand in friendship and solidarity." And since we started in 2022, we're 4 responses away from 200 responses. 200 times showing up around the country anytime something happens. And we'll show up at whether it's a JCC or a synagogue or, in a neighborhood where somebody has thrown flyers. The idea is we want people to get beyond the digital advocacy and just be good friends.
I like that. I think we
Yeah.
all need to be good friends, don't we?
Yeah. Well, Philos means friend, so
I know.
it's easier for me, right? But
Right.
it just I tell you what, like of all the stuff that I've done a lot on this whole anti-Semitism stuff, but for me, it has made the biggest impact for me, just personally. Like I'm not talking about the organization. Like being two things. One is being able to actually physically show up and be sometimes the only non-Jewish person in the room or at the event or in the place. Sometimes the only person. Sometimes it's me and like 2 other Christians and and a handful of Jewish people. But like it's just something profound in that. Something profound happens, and it has really impacted me personally. And to the point that it's hard for me to see myself doing anything else because I just love it so much, and yeah, I think it's just really powerful.
Well, I think the passion really comes through in what you're sharing with us. And this would be a good time to take a pause, actually, Luke. And speaking of bringing people together rather than just being on social media and really converging together for a common cause, I'd like to remind you, our dear listeners, that indeed, Jewish National Fund USA's Global Conference for Israel will be taking place this coming November 30th. That's November 30th, 2023, November 30th to December 3rd in the Mile High city of Denver, Colorado. Have you ever been to Denver, Luke?
I have a few times. Beautiful
Oh,
city.
okay. It's a beautiful city. And you know what? You might enjoy it again if you go to the JNF USA Global Conference for Israel. It's really just a remarkable event. It brings together Jewish leaders and innovators from around the world who are shaping the future of the Jewish state. And you also don't want to miss America's largest Shabbat dinner. I'm guessing you've been to a Shabbat dinner, Luke.
Oh man, it's my favorite thing, and consistently when we do our post-trip surveys to all our participants, the Shabbat dinner is oftentimes the number one experience that people remember and bring back and want to commit to doing in their own homes.
And again, we're talking about non-Jewish people.
Yeah,
I think
and
it's beautiful
I'll
because
tell
again,
you what,
it's the principle. I mean, we'll get back to the conference in a second, but it's the principle of what Shabbat is all about. It's about unplugging and it's about reconnecting with family, friends, sitting down for a meal and enjoying one's physical company being right there. That's really what it's all about. And of course, Shabbat is about that day of rest and it's about unplugging.
it is, and it like it's so there's so many. I mean, I've described it like this, and it really is. It's one of those experiences again. It's very transformational.
Mhm.
Is that the when I bring a non-Jewish person into the home of somebody for Shabbat dinner, right? And we sing Shalom Aleichem, and I'm not Jewish, but I can give that one all I can. There's and then they sing the Woman of Valor, the
Ashes
Proverbs.
Chayil. Yeah.
Yeah, and like one of the things that's common practice in Christian, like when Christians read their Bible, and if they typically will read a proverb every day because there's 31 chapters, so there's typically do one every day, and so a lot of Christians have this routine of reading the proverbs, and so when they hear that, they're like, "Oh, I know that." And then when the parents of the household lay hands on their children and pray the blessing that the patriarchs prayed on their kids, I'm telling you, like grown men start weeping at that moment, properly weeping. And I'll tell you what, because they so want that relationship with their kids, and so they're just like drawn to that and that rhythm of life. But the other thing that happens is, what it does, the anti-Semites want to say that the people of the Bible is not the Israelites of the Bible is not the Israel of today. The Jews of the Bible is not the Jews of today. That's where the anti-Semites want to say, that's where they want to go. And what Shabbat does is it smashes together ancient and modern Israel and says, no, this is a coherent people that has been around for a very long time. And that what you're seeing now, this practice of the Shabbat, has been done for thousands of years by this very people. And it's a continuation of, not only is it show the power of community, of home, of rhythm of life, but it also shows to the Christian that God is faithful, right? Because if he is faithfully preserving this people throughout generations, regardless of how often the persecution has come, which is often, it nonetheless, they are still here. The Jews are still here. And so, when a person who's feeling like God's forgotten them, they can see in this experience and in the experience of the Jewish people, like, no, God's still around. He's got this.
That is so beautiful. I love the way that you articulated that, Luke. And I've heard it said before, something to the effect of, it's not that the Jewish people keep Shabbat, it's that Shabbat has kept the Jewish people.
Yes, absolutely. I'm a firm believer of that. As a non-Jewish Shabbat lover, I will affirm that 100%.
Okay, well, listen, maybe you can start having Shabbat dinners in your home. But listen, in the meantime, if you want a really good Shabbat dinner, again, America's largest Shabbat dinner will be at Jewish National Fund USA's Global Conference for Israel, once again from November 30th to December 3rd. And to sign up, visit jnf.org/global. Once again, jnf.org/global to register and see really the incredible interactive Israel experiences, the outstanding speakers, unparalleled spirit that you're going to experience there, and also wonderful networking opportunities. I've been to a number of them, Luke, and there's just such great spirit and energy. There's a Hebrew word called ruach. Have you ever heard that word, ruach?
Ruach.
Ruach means
like
ruach
spirit?
means yeah, it means energy. It means spirit.
Right,
It can mean
right,
spirit, but it really means like energy. Like there's a
right.
real ruach in the room. There's a real
Yes,
energy in the
I can
room.
imagine.
So hope to see everybody there at the conference. And Lou, spread the word on the conference. Maybe some
Oh,
of
for
your
sure.
colleagues and the people that are part of the Philos Project might like to join there as well, because really there's a lot of opportunities for networking, just for learning and growing there. Now, back to more on what the Philos Project does. There was another project that you have called Abraham's Missing Child Initiative. I thought this was absolutely fascinating. I want you to talk about it and share it with our listeners.
Yeah, so Abraham's Missing Child came about. It was actually the title of an article by our executive director in the Wall Street Journal, where it was talking about the fact that the Abraham Accords were largely an agreement between Israel, the only Jewish state in the world, and places like UAE and Morocco and Bahrain. which are Muslim countries. But where's the Christians? Where's the Christian state? Where's the Christian state signing on to that?
Mhm.
Obviously, there aren't any real Christian states in the Middle East, but there's ones that are close. But there are Christian communities in each of those countries, in all the countries of the region. And the idea was like, well, let's welcome the Christian community into this conversation about the Abraham Accords and normalization and the opportunities that that were presented by the Abraham Accords. Stephen, like, could we have imagined 5 years ago that would have, like, there would be a peace deals across the Middle East between Israel and United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, and Morocco, and Sudan. Sudan had the Khartoum Declaration, right?
Right.
Like no one would have imagined it, right? So then let's take this opportunity to take what is really an exciting change in the region and add kind of the Christian conversation to it. And so we brought together heads of denomination, heads of some of the Christian churches, to really like invite them to be a part of this, remind the countries in the Middle East that they have indigenous Christian populations, that they aren't like, people that came from the West that are Christian. No, like Christianity came from the Middle East. It is where it's from. And so and it continues to, like, we're still have ongoing programming related to that, and we're excited to see where it goes. Listen, I'll be very honest with you, Stephen, that the Christian communities in the region are not doing well. They're not.
I
There
know
are.
that because I was in Iraq just in November 2022, and you can see that many left. ISIS destroyed churches, and fortunately, UNESCO is working on rebuilding some of the more prominent ones. And it's interesting, in 2008, I was in Syria, and I was there during Christmas time. It was Christmas, New Year time at the end of December and it was the end of December. And I remember seeing, I was in Damascus, and I remember going to churches in Damascus, and I was chatting with people outside the churches. They spoke enough English, and they were from Iraq, and they had escaped Iraq because of religious persecution and because of the civil war at that time, and they were in Iraq. Now, fast forward to November 2022, and I was in Iraq, and who's coming to Iraq but Syrians fleeing the civil war to have a greater economic opportunity there. I didn't ask if they were Christians or not,
Right.
but it's interesting just how times have changed. But clearly, you're right. The Christian communities there are suffering terribly. Egypt, for example, the Coptic Christians there, and so on, and all throughout the region. It's a very, very sad situation. And again, as you said, it's such an ancient community.
Yeah, actually, there are more Iraqi Christians in the Chicago area than
It's my
are
hometown. I know.
Iraqi Christians left in Iraq,
Yeah.
which is tragic. And I remember when Robert and I went to Iraq in, I think it was like 2017. We were on a bridge in the region, and I remember standing with a guy, an older gentleman, and he was remarking about how when he was a child, when he was a kid, he played with Jews in his town. And he said, if we only knew then what we know now, I think we might have behaved differently. Meaning, like, all the Jews were kicked out,
Yeah.
and there's a whole thing that the jihadis say: first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people, right? And it became like, first we'll kick out the Jews, and then we'll kick out the Christians. And unfortunately, in large swaths of Iraq and Syria, mind you, that's been the case, and it's a tragedy because,
It
well, it's just a tragedy.
It is. It's a huge tragedy. And I remember amongst my fondest memories in Syria were going to visit Christian sites. Outside of Aleppo, there was the big column where, was it Saint Simon
Yeah.
sat upon,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I remember visiting that. And then there's a city outside of Damascus called Malula. I don't know if you're
Mhm.
familiar with it or not. They
I,
still they still speak Aramaic in Malula.
right. Well, that
And
city got destroyed. Actually, it got wiped out. There isn't a city anymore there. It completely got destroyed. And
by
one of the things that we tried to do was actually tried to see if we could get that that whole, not just this, not necessarily all the people, but that, that hub where people spoke Aramaic, because basically there isn't a city anymore anywhere in the world where the majority of the residents speak Aramaic. Now we've been working with, in Israel, in the north of Israel, there's an Aramaic community that's trying to kind of, in a sense, create that,
Mhm.
in like an Aramaic Christian town. And we've been working on that almost since the beginning of Philos, because that for people who are interested even in just like biblical languages, leave aside whether or not like the religious part of it, but just the languages themselves. I mean, it's Aramaic is one of the most ancient, and one that's, I mean, like lots of Jews read Aramaic.
Well, some
Um,
of our prayers are in Aramaic. Our memorial prayer for the dead, the Kaddish, is Aramaic.
right. And so to lose that like connection to people actually still speaking it as a just a spoken language is a real tragedy. It's a
It is.
real.
In Malula, I brought up the city not only from the Aramaic perspective, but also is a place of Christian pilgrimage, because that's where Saint Tekla, you know who Saint Tekla was? She was chased by the Romans, and there was a
Okay.
mountain, and the mountain split into two, and you go through this sort of canyon where Saint Tekla ran through. And
Amazing.
and it was just amazing just to be there. I did not know the story before I went there. You learn when you travel. That's one of the beauties and joys of travel, is the knowledge that you get. And so again, it's that is just so intrinsically a part of each one of these countries. And
Yeah.
to have that is our collective patrimony as human beings destroyed, it just kills me.
Yeah. No, I mean, the reason that we actually shifted from talking about, go from positive Christian engagement to the Middle East to positive Christian engagement in the Near East, well, it actually came from an article, uh, in Foreign Affairs magazine by Charles Malik, the Lebanese statesman, philosopher, and he said if you draw a 900-mile radius out from Jerusalem, you are in the lands of the Bible. Basically, all of that, everything that kind of gets in that 900 miles, is in the Bible, and that's a huge, like a way to kind of focus our efforts, because Middle East includes way more than just that 900 miles, but to kind of use it was like, I would love, I mean, my dream, Stephen, is to one day, and we just got to hope these things happen, would be able to, leave Tel Aviv, drive up and have a great meal in Beirut, drive over the mountains and have dinner in Damascus, maybe spend the night and then drive back, across the plateau, taking the King's Highway down through Jordan. I mean, like how amazing that be?
Listen, some of the best food I've ever had was in both Lebanon and Syria. The best falafel I ever ate was in Sidon in Lebanon. And it's at just a sidewalk kind of cafe. And it's just at a corner, and it's a very famous place. Don't ask me the name. And it was hands down the world's best falafel I've ever eaten. So
Like,
again,
be careful with those words like that right now.
I know, and I know
People
the
get to
show's
really like
I know, and the
feisty
show's
on their.
and the show is called IsraelCast. It's not called Lebanon Cast, but in any event, but maybe that's because when I'm in Israel, I eat so much else besides falafel that I probably haven't eaten that much falafel, I suppose, in Israel. But in any event, but that was let's say, even if it wasn't the best, because how are you ever going to say the best? It was one of the most memorable, certainly, that I've ever had. But when you talk about connecting the Middle East, people are talking about the day that there will be a high-speed train from Israel to Dubai. And
Right.
so,
That, I mean,
yeah, you can get up in the morning in Tel Aviv, you can go to your meetings in Dubai, and then you can take the train back and be back in Tel Aviv in time for cocktails. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, the thing was like none of us, again, to my earlier point, none of us expected that, that we would have 5 years ago the Abraham Accords,
right. I
right?
agree.
And so you just never like I think that's the reason why, as much as the Israel-Palestinian conflict in the region, even as much as that kind of sucks up so much of the oxygen in the air and the news,
Mhm.
I think we have to be people of hope that, it's you never know the end of the story. Well, you kind of do, but you don't
Well,
know
listen, we Jews
all the steps
are the
along the
people.
way.
We Jews are the people of hope. Of course, the Israeli national anthem, Hatikva, the hope, etc. And the late Shimon Peres said there's two types of people. There's optimists and pessimists, but it's more fun to go through life as an optimist.
Right.
Which I so agree. Listen, just a couple other bases. Really, I'm so mindful of your time. I want to talk about another project in the Philos family of projects, and it's the Philos Black, which aims to identify and build the next generation of African American Christian leaders. I'm particularly interested in that because there's been, dare I say, so much animosity in the African American community towards the Jewish community and towards Israel, when, as I've mentioned before here on the program, there were Jews that were marching with Dr. King and setting up historically Black colleges and universities and helping to set up the NAACP, and the list goes on. And so to have that friction now is just so sad. So talk about what the Philos Project is doing in that regard.
Right. So, we again initially like identify that there's these areas that we really need to try and reframe some of the conversations, try and update them. And yeah, there is this oftentimes there's the appeal to the moment when Jews were walking with Dr. King. I mean, it was super common. Even I was talking to somebody recently who bought a house in Short Hills, New Jersey, and in the deed it said not allowed to sell to Jews or Black people, basically. And that was like 1964, right? I have a friend who lives outside of Chicago, and the house that he bought or the town that he was in, like what you were not allowed to buy a house if you were a Jewish person or a
Where
Black
where
person.
was it? Kenilworth?
I don't remember.
Probably. Well, listen,
Yeah,
the area where I grew up in a few years before was restricted from Jews. So
right.
I'm
And,
very,
and
very familiar
so
with that.
and so I so there was that common cause, and then once that a lot of that stuff that got in a sense addressed, right? Like you can't have that stuff anymore. And there were issues that began to kind of drive the wedge between the Black and Jewish communities. And they just kind of, it starts off as a very narrow difference, and it just kind of grows and grows and grows into something that's much further apart. And the appeal is often to that former place of where we, Jews and Blacks walk side by side, and yet, like, the Jews remember that the African Americans typically don't. There isn't this like there's this real desire for relationship on the Jewish side. It's not so reciprocated on the African American side. And so the idea that we had was twofold. Let's create this kind of like a leadership journey, almost like
Mhm.
to identify and elevate Black voices, uh, to really turn them into global leaders. And
Mhm.
by global leaders, it means that like starting with an experience by going on a trip to Israel, which we do a couple times a year, 40 person buses, all college students go on a trip to Israel, and then they come back and they participate in programming about the Black-Jewish relationship in the civil rights. We used to do regularly a retreat in Cincinnati where we went to the American Jewish Archives and had that whole, learned about that moment in history. And then we would go to Charleston, South Carolina, which something like 80% of African Americans in the United States can trace in at least one ancestor who went through the port of Charleston. And then from there, you go on this what I would call the tour of the South, which is this experience of seeing the other places in the southern part of the United States. And it ends with a trip to Africa. In a sense, what you're doing is like kind of walking back through history. And the idea is that we create this three-legged stool of the African American experience in America, their experience in Israel as a place where their faith, because they're Christians, their faith was born, the story of the patriarchs, of Moses, of the Exodus, of this biblical connection to and then to Africa as well, and then also highlighting all the work that Israel is doing on the continent of Africa in terms of ag tech, water tech, that kind of stuff. Really creating this three-legged stool of African Americans, the United States, their experience in the United States, Israel, and Africa. And by doing that, you create these globally minded leaders who are able to then really impact their community. Because one of the things that happens, and I hear this a lot from, you'll have a person who has some of the leadership qualities, they get thrust into a leadership position, but their lack of experience in a few key areas leads to them falling. And then when they fall, it kind of creates this ripple effect of, well, we won't hire another one of them kind of things. And so by having these kind of global leadership, people who have gone through this really hardy program, you've been to, we talked about Syria and Iraq and Lebanon. When you come back home, you're a changed person because you crossed a culture. And when you cross a culture, you see blind spot. Well, you see what was formerly a blind spot, you now see. Right. And as a result, you actually have a better ability to impact the group around you because of that experience. Right. When somebody
as long as you speak up,
Exactly.
I mean, that's the important thing, because sometimes people have the experience, but then they don't do anything with it.
Right.
But I want to know who are these leaders? How do you select them? And they're all African American?
Yeah, all African American.
And are they students, or who goes on these?
They start out as students, and so
and it's separate from the Passages program.
Yeah, it's our partnership with them. So the first trip they go on is the trip to Israel. That's through Passages. Okay. We do like I said, we typically do anywhere between two or three buses a year of African American college students. They come back, they get an opportunity to apply to go to Cincinnati for the experience at the American Jewish Archives. So if a bus has 40 people, typically about 30 will show up in Cincinnati at that. So we lose some through just attrition. And then those also get to apply then to go to Charleston. So it's a process that not everybody is up to it, right? So it kind of, people self-select out of it, if you will, because people who want it, they got the drive for it. The opportunity is there because there's so much available out there. We get requests all the time.
And where do people go to sign up for that program?
That program is through our Philos Black portal, and the woman who runs that program, her name is Crystal Bracy, and she can be reached at Crystal at PhilosProject.org.
Or
Crystal with
else
a K and a Y.
give
Yeah,
give give a shout out to the Philos Project website so people can learn more.
yeah. Philos Project. So Philos is spelled Philos project .org, and it's
Fantastic. And then one other project that I want to ask you about is the Philos Latino, because you referenced it earlier on. Can you just do a quick deep dive on that?
oh man, they do so much. I mean, there's so much excitement within the Hispanic community for Israel, for mostly for Israel. So they don't know a lot of Jewish people, but they sure know a lot about Israel. I mean, there's a taxi cab driver in my town up here in New York. It's a Hispanic taxi cab driver, but he's got a giant Star of David on the back of his cab,
Why is
right? Like
that?
he just loves Israel that much, right? And so our work is to really kind of take that passion, that excitement for Israel, and kind of let's make it deeper, right? Because it's very kind of superficial. And so by pushing it down a little bit, it just really helps the Hispanic community connect. So we have a radio show once a week on like one of the largest Christian radio syndicated programs in the country.
What's it
Uh,
about?
Everything Israel, the Jewish people, theology. It's a combination. It's all in Spanish, so I would tell you that I know exactly what they say, but actually I don't know anything. I mean, I've heard it. I just don't know what they say. But I hear it's great. Um, and then we have we have this art exhibit we do every year called Nosotros, which brings Hispanic artists, and they do a piece that's related to like Israel or the Jewish people or the Jewish experience in South America or the Caribbean. And that we've done for the last 2 years, been a partnership between us and Yeshiva University here in New York. And it's really cool. We have right now on the ground in Israel as we speak, we have over 40 pastors who are for the first time going to Israel. Many of them, the idea is that they will bring their congregations to Israel, and so that they can have that same transformational experience that all of us have had by going to see the land for ourselves.
How fantastic. Listen, before we wrap, I want to talk a little bit about Luke because you've had a very interesting trajectory before you got to the point of
Yeah.
being the deputy director of the Philos Project. You want to just give our listeners a quick career highlights, the Cliff's Notes version, because I know that you've taught in over 45 countries.
Yeah.
What I mean,
I,
I don't expect you to rattle off all the countries, but what were some of the highlights there?
Yeah, well, so I was born and raised in Seattle. I was a missionary for 12 years, which put me in a lot of those countries. The first half was mostly in Asia. So I did a lot of, like kind of church planting, teaching people how to read their Bible, that kind of thing. That was my work.
We're in
And
Asia.
then basically every country in Asia.
Okay.
So, I've been chased out of villages in Nepal and India, run around China a bit here and there. In 2005, I started fighting human trafficking. And so from 2005 to 2010, that was mostly my focus. And I had shifted out of Asia and was mostly focused on anti-trafficking work in both Europe and Africa. And so it was there that I began to really like identify the difference between advocacy and policy. So what happens when everybody knows about something? Like then what, right? So you have to have the policy ready. That got me interested in the intersection of like faith and politics, which led me to get a master's, which led me to move to Washington D.C. Actors go to Hollywood and policy wonks go to D.C. So there I was, wandering the streets of D.C. trying to get a job. Ended up at an organization called the Institute on Religion and Democracy, And it was through them that I went to Israel for the first time. That was 2012. I don't think I knew any Jewish people until 2011.
Are you
Like,
kidding?
I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. I'm totally new to this. I didn't grow up with any kind of like, my parents weren't like anti-Israel, but they didn't care. I mean, they didn't like, there
Yeah, it
was
wasn't on their radar.
wasn't on the radar, right? And like I said, I don't think until 13 years ago I knew any Jewish people.
So how many
And
times have you been to Israel since that first visit?
I just finished about a month ago my 34th trip.
Listen, before we get into just one or two other quick questions about Israel, then we'll sign off. I did want to ask you about human trafficking. What do you think would surprise us most? And what should we know about human trafficking? Just real briefly.
Yeah, well, my model to attack it was actually it's a business model. If it costs $100,000 to get a girl from Sarajevo to Amsterdam, and you can make it cost $200,000. The cost at the back end is higher and less people participate in things that are more expensive, right? Like, there's less people buy Mercedes than Hondas, right? Less people, if you make something more expensive, less people will participate. And so my goal was to make basically prostitution expensive. And because so much of a lot of prostitution is related to human trafficking, it's that process of, well, then how do you make it more expensive? And so my goal was basically throw sand into the gears of the organized crime system of transferring girls from one place to another. And so I led teams of young people who would go into the dark web, basically identify the routes on which the girls were being trafficked, uh, go down those same routes, monitoring and documenting what they were seeing, giving that information over to civil society and police, and like moving very quickly. So we were ahead of any, of the, yeah, like the pimps and the bad guys kind of thing. We go into major cities, red light districts. We buy bouquets of flowers and we walk around and we give flowers to people. And that would be our, like, we just looked like a bunch of, very friendly weirdos. But we would then get asked questions like, where you from, how you been here, like that kind of thing. And it would again give us more and more information. So in 2009, I spent several months doing that work. That's one of the reasons I've been in so many countries. Is because I went to basically all the countries of Europe, doing that work and managing the teams that were tracing the routes. It was very intense work, and
It's still going on, sadly.
oh yeah, I mean it's never going to be eradicated you know in any. I mean, but the idea is, how about less people, right? I
Well, and it's
mean,
also going, look what's happening at our southern border.
exactly, and it's a tragedy to the fact that we did such. I mean, when I started to work against human trafficking, there were only like 13 states had laws against human trafficking, and by 2010, all 50 states had laws, and so it was. I mean, that was a accomplishment because if there's not a law, it's hard to prosecute somebody who's doing something like that.
Yeah.
By having laws, it helps, but at the same time, we now are, there's so much. It's not just exploitation for the like sexual exploitation, but it's labor exploitation. And one of my great frustrations is the amount of people who are very willing to kind of almost turn a blind eye to labor exploitation because it's cheaper, right? Like, yeah, but the guy, the illegal immigrant who is riding around delivering food here in the streets of New York City, if he gets hit by a car, he has actually no legal recourse, really, because he's typically afraid that he'll get deported. Yeah, I mean, you have Medicaid, some of the like, some of those ways in
Well,
which
I think an emergency room isn't going to turn him down, but I think
exactly,
it's
but
a lot of the aftercare and the
exactly,
the the support.
And he can't go
that,
back to it,
and he can't
right?
go back, right? So that's, I know, it's such a mess, and
It's
it's
such
just
a
so incredibly sad. And I hope someone is able to figure it out. I always like to end this show on a rather positive note. So we'll have to have a separate conversation with you about human trafficking, because again, it's a very large, sad, deep subject. But like I said, let's end on a positive note. So you've been to Israel numerous times. One or two favorite things, standout moments in Israel, things that you always enjoy doing each time you go back, favorite food maybe?
man. So I love I just I mean I love it, man. I love to I love to stand on the Mount of Olives overlooking the old city. And that site in there, it gets crowded sometimes, but it never gets old. I just there's something standing there and being in that place that is just was like, I mean, like I could say Jesus was here, which is cool, but it's just like it's a very special city. I mean, I tell people that it's the juncture of three continents. Africa, Asia, and Europe are kind of meet there. And I think there's just something special about it. I love to go down to Tel Aviv. I always get some form of seafood there whether it's one of those restaurants along the beach or down at the port area, just north of like the Hilton. That's one of my favorite areas. I love to, in the springtime when in the Galilee the wildflowers are out,
Yeah.
like there's just like the yellow and the purple and the red, the poppies here and there. Like those purple flowers that are like balls of purple that are just, I mean, like there's nothing quite like it. It just is beautiful, and I have so many great friends, and yeah, I'm a big fan of bringing people to that place and saying, "Hey, check this place out. It's pretty cool."
And we're
It's
glad that you
different
do.
than it's different than going to like Costa Rica's nice, but my savior wasn't born in Costa Rica, so it's something special for me as a Christian in that place, and that like I just can't. It's so important to me. Like personally, it's important.
Right. All right. Well, on that note, we're going to leave it right there. Luke Moon, this has been such a pleasure to speak with you. I want to thank you so much for joining us here on this episode of Israel Cast, and definitely to be continued. And we'll see you over a Shabbat dinner one of these days or one of these evenings.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
All right. I'll get the kitchen going, and we'll have info about Luke and the Philos Project on the show notes page of our website, jnf.org/IsraelCast. And of course, we do release new episodes of the show every other Wednesday. So mark your calendars, just like we want you to mark your calendars for that Jewish National Fund USA Global Conference happening once again, November 30th to December 3rd in Denver, Colorado. And just so you never miss an episode of IsraelCast, do subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcast. Simply search for IsraelCast. It's that easy. And don't forget to rate and review us, because that really helps us with our rankings, which in turn make it easier for more people around the world to find us. Or you can always enjoy the show by visiting us at our website. I hope after all of these years, you finally got it. It's jnf.org/IsraelCast. Now it takes a whole moshav, as I always say, to put IsraelCast together. For that, we thank Vivian Grossman, Dara Shapiro, J.D. Krebs, and Ellie Cadron. Our editors are Jay Rothman and James Casada from Mirtone Studios right here in the very heart of New York City. And the music that you hear at the top until the program is titled My Eden. It's by the very talented Rafi Malkiel from his album Water on the Tzaddik label. IsraelCast is powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. For more info about JNF USA, visit jnf.org. And if you'd like to write to us with story ideas, I know Luke would love to hear from you, and so would I. So do email us at israelcast@jnf.org. Meantime, I'm Steven Shalowitz. Thank you for tuning in, and looking forward to having you join us on future episodes of IsraelCast.